Working together, Pope Francis begins a 3-day pilgrimage to Romania, a majority Orthodox country. We're on the ground for this historic trip. Immigration and tariffs. President Donald Trump threatens to slap Mexico with new import taxes over the battle at the border. How the country is responding. Hostile to religious liberty. A Republican senator slams a judicial nominee, and a newspaper editorial board fires back. We're on Capitol Hill. And ACI-Africa. The editor-in-chief of EWTN's newly formed news agency talks about the church on the continent and previews what's to come. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 31st, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis is in Romania. He began his 3-day visit today by praising the progress the former communist nation has made with religious freedom and discussing the plight of migrants.
Che tutto questo abbia un'anima e un cuore e una chiara direzione di marcia.
The Holy Father told Romanian officials refugees should have a clear direction of travel. The Pope is visiting the majority Orthodox country 20 years after St. John Paul II. He was greeted at the airport this morning by the country's president and first lady, as well as leaders from the local Catholic and Orthodox churches. The country is roughly 82% Orthodox. Catholic news agency's Vatican analyst Andrea Gaiaducci is traveling with the Pope and joins us from St. Joseph Cathedral in Romania, where Pope Francis celebrated Mass. Andrea, tell us about how the Pope was received.
Well, the Pope was received pretty well. I mean, this is an Orthodox country. The majority of people are Orthodox, so we cannot expect so many people in the streets, but there are about 20,000 people that gathered around St. Joseph Cathedral. They're not just in front of the cathedral. The cathedral is filled, totally filled with about 1,000 people, but there are people around everywhere. There was some protests, some idea of protests, but there weren't any protests. Everybody was very much cheering Pope Francis.
Andrea, Pope Francis met today with Patriarch Daniel of the Romanian Orthodox Church in the same room where Pope John Paul II and the Romanian Patriarch at the time met 20 years ago. What is the message the Holy Father is trying to get out with his outreach?
Well, Pope Francis had this meeting with the Patriarch of the Romanian Orthodox Church in the National Cathedral. It was very important. The main achievement was to try to foster some unity between the two churches. I mean, Romanian Orthodox Church and Catholic Church have had good relations so far since John Paul II came here 20 years ago. And that's why, it was very symbolic, very significant that they met in the very room where John Paul II and Patriarch Theotis were together. There will be differences, theological differences. There is nothing, the path to unity is not ended, but I think that this is a first step, a good step forward.
Okay, so obviously that addresses the church talk, but tell me, what is the situation like for Catholics in Romania today?
Well, Romania just got out 30 years ago from a dictatorship, a communist regime that generally tried to eradicate all the Catholic Church from the nation. So they endured a strong persecution, mostly the Greek Catholic Church, because they are the Church of Byzantine Rite. They were the closest ones to the Orthodox. Orthodox Church was nationalized, and the Greek Catholic Church was abolished and was asked to be absorbed. That's why Pope Francis is coming here and is going to beatify 7 Greek Catholic martyrs, Greek Catholic bishops that refused to leave Rome and to be with the Orthodox Church, to be with the state. And still there are some rebounds of this communist era, so the situation is not easy yet. There are still some harshness about restitution of buildings that were belonging to the Church, Catholic Church before, and then they were given to the state or to the Orthodox Church. On the other hand, the Catholic Church now is living a good moment, with Pope Francis' visit and with a lot of initiatives they had. And last year there was 100th anniversary of the Romanian state, and they also reminded that in that declaration of the Great Romania there was a Catholic Church, Greek Catholic bishop, and an Orthodox bishop, and they hugged together in that moment.
So many important issues, and like you say, it's important for Pope Francis to be there to build relations as the church leader. Andrea Gaiaducci, Vatican analyst for Catholic News Agency. Thanks so much for telling us about it.
It was nice to be with you.
A bishop in the Philippines critical of the country's deadly war on drugs says he has the support of Pope Francis. Bishop Pablo David says he has received death threats for his criticism of the government, but adds the Holy Father is encouraging him to be a voice for human rights and dignity. Several advocate groups in the Philippines estimate more than 20,000 people have been killed since the government began its crackdown on drugs in 2016. An auxiliary bishop in Chile has apologized to the Jewish community for remarks he made last week. In an interview with CNN Chile, Father Carlos Irrazabal called the Jewish culture male-dominated, and on the streets, women walk 10 steps behind men. The Archdiocese of Santiago says Jewish leaders received the apology, quote, in spirit of fraternity. President Trump plans to slap tariffs on Mexican imports to the U.S. as a way to combat illegal immigration at the southern border. Mexico responded today, saying it will not retaliate, but will push for dialogue with the U.S. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports.
Good evening, Wyatt. Mexico has taken measures to crack down on illegal migration at the border, but President Trump is pushing the country to do more. But the timing of this latest threat is perplexing some because it could jeopardize the president's own goal of a better trade deal with Mexico. President Trump trying his latest tactic to stop illegal immigration. He writes, on June 10th, the United States will impose a 5% tariff on all goods coming into our country from Mexico until such time as illegal migrants coming through Mexico and into our country stop. The president says those tariffs will increase until the illegal immigration problem is remedied. And though courts could challenge the president's action, the White House argues he's using his legal authority.
This is a measured response to the authority that he has. There's case law that supports it from precedent where this has been done in the past. And again, the president is going to fulfill his duty. It would be nice if Congress would fulfill theirs.
The president's tariff threat comes as he also urges lawmakers to approve USMCA, a new trade deal between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada.
They should go through with that because it's good for American workers and it's good policy. It's good for farmers, it's good for manufacturers.
But passing a trade deal is even being opposed by lawmakers in the president's own party. Senator Chuck Grassley writes, trade policy and border security are separate issues. This is a misuse of presidential tariff authority and counter to congressional intent. Following through on this threat would seriously jeopardize passage of USMCA.
No.
Mexico's president says these strong-arm tactics won't lead to anything good. He dispatched his Foreign Affairs Secretary to Washington Friday to push for more dialogue. The executive vice president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says these tariffs will be paid by American families and businesses and won't resolve the problems at the border. Now, the president's ally, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, says he doesn't like tariffs, but in this case, it's a national security issue and Mexico needs to change its behavior. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the United States will not stand in the way of a European plan to deliver humanitarian aid to Iran.
We've been pretty clear about trade with Iran. There are items that are sanctioned and there are items that are not. Those items that are subject to sanctions, we will do our best to enforce the American sanctions regime that has been put in place.
The United States has imposed sanctions on companies doing business with Tehran. Pompeo was speaking during his first trip to Germany as Secretary of State. Later, he met with Chancellor Angela Merkel. In Iran, protesters set fire to U.S. and Israeli flags. The demonstrations coincide with annual protests to mark Jerusalem Day, held each year on the last Friday of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Tehran uses the occasion to express support for Palestinians. At least 7 people are dead after a suicide bombing in Afghanistan. The attack targeted a U.S. convoy in the capital of Kabul. A spokesman says 4 American service members received minor injuries. It is the second suicide blast in as many days in Kabul. The relics of 2 Fatima child saints were stolen during a pilgrimage tour in Italy. Officials say 2 small pieces of clothing were taken Wednesday from a church in Verona. The Portuguese shepherd children were canonized in 2017. 100 years earlier, they reported visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary, leading Fatima to become one of the world's most important Catholic shrines. Coming up, as a Republican senator slams a judicial nominee, Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi breaks down both sides of the argument. And Georgia passes a heartbeat bill, and and Hollywood reacts with threats of boycott. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. One of President Donald Trump's judicial picks is engulfed in a debate over religious freedom. A Republican senator slammed the nominee for fighting a Catholic farmer in court, but the Wall Street Journal warns the senator's line of questioning could be dangerous. Correspondent Jason Calvi shares the latest on a story he reported before the controversy erupted. Jason?
Wyatt, supporters often praise the president for his conservative judicial nominations, but they're divided on one district court nominee, Michael Bogren, to serve in Michigan. Senator Josh Hawley tells me his answers in last week's confirmation hearing were unacceptable.
You think that the Catholic families pointing to the teachings of their church is equivalent to a KKK member invoking Christianity? That's your view?
From a legal perspective,
you can just give me a yes or no answer on that.
From a legal
one.
perspective, Senator,
Can you say no?
There is no distinction.
Republican Senator Josh Hawley last week questioned Michael Bogren. Bogren defended the city of East Lansing, Michigan, when it stopped a Catholic farmer from selling at its market.
Respectfully, I represent clients, not causes. This is not ideological.
East Lansing banned Steve Tennis for refusing to let a same-sex couple marry at his orchard. Bogren wrote of the farmer, plaintiffs attempt to dress their arguments up in a shimmering gown of First Amendment and religious righteousness and parade it down the runway of moral superiority. When stripped of its costume, however, what lurks beneath is simply this: discriminatory conduct.
I am shocked by the statements that I read in your briefs. I am shocked by this kind of language.
Now the Wall Street Journal jumps in. Mr. Bogren was trying to make the best case for his client, as he's obliged to do under the canon of legal ethics. The paper's editorial board warns if nominees can be disqualified for every argument they make for a client, conservative judicial nominees will soon find themselves blocked from judgeships for defending religious liberty. Hawley today shoots back and tells me,
this is not about vigorous representation. This is about choosing to represent his clients by attacking this Catholic family in a very personal way that denigrates their faith. He was very firm in his answers, that he said he saw no problem with this.
We expect the Senate Judiciary Committee to vote on this nomination in June. Conservative group the Family Research Council is urging senators to vote no. In Michigan, the 2019 East Lansing Farmers Market opens this Sunday at 10 in the morning, and Catholic farmer Steve Tennis and his Country Mill Farm are expected to be there. A lower court is allowing that as they hear the case.
Jason,
Wyatt?
Can you predict of how the senators might vote in this?
Well, we're still waiting to hear back from the senators. Bogren's written answers to their questions are due next week, and senators will be weighing what they read there, as well as this debate between the Wall Street Journal and Senator Josh Hawley.
Correspondent Jason Calvary covering the story right from the very beginning. Thanks, Jason. A judge says Missouri's last abortion clinic can remain open. The ruling comes hours before the Planned Parenthood facility's license was set to expire. Government officials threatened not to renew it, citing concerns over compromised patient safety and legal violations. But the circuit judge issued a temporary restraining order. A hearing is set for Tuesday. Louisiana's Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards, a practicing Catholic, signs the state's heartbeat bill. It bans abortion once a baby's heartbeat is detected. The law takes effect only if neighboring Mississippi's heartbeat bill is upheld in a federal appeals court. Hollywood studio executives say they may reevaluate filming in Georgia if that state's heartbeat law goes into effect. This week, studio chiefs from Netflix, the Walt Disney Company, and Warner Media, which includes HBO, Turner, and Warner Brothers, all issued statements indicating they're reviewing the situation. Netflix chief content officer implied their company is considering a boycott. Jay Richards joins me now. He's the host of EWTN programs A Force for Good and business professor at the Catholic University of America. Jay, welcome back to the broadcast.
Great to be with you.
Thanks to generous tax credits, the city of Atlanta has become a major hub of TV, film production. What do you make of these potential boycotts from a financial standpoint?
Well, what's strange about it is we've gone from individual citizens boycotting companies to companies boycotting people, segments of the population. I think we've got to look at it in two ways. I mean, the reality is that Netflix is, frankly, deeply involved with Planned Parenthood, and so I think this reflects actually kind of an ideological commitment, at least on the part of some of the leadership. At the same time, it's really a bad business decision, I think, because the reality is that companies save millions of dollars by producing programs in in Atlanta and in Georgia. I mean, there's a reason they're going to Georgia rather than California, because it in many cases means millions of dollars. And so what Netflix is really doing is, I think they're banking on politicians in Georgia not being bold and backing down easily. But if they really had to boycott the state, I think the company could end up losing millions of dollars. So I honestly think at the moment they're counting on a buckle by the politicians in Georgia.
Well, to follow up on that, in general, how much of a risk is it for companies to take a position that puts them at odds with more conservative viewpoints?
Well, in this case, I mean, they're protesting Georgia's heartbeat abortion law, which about 70% of the population apparently supports. And so they're actually not just against social conservatives in general, but a majority of Americans, and I suspect a supermajority in Georgia. And so they themselves, I think, risk a boycott. And I've noticed already on social media that people are unsubscribing from Netflix. And so that's something I think in their minds, they know there's a risk there, but at the moment they assume that siding with social secularists and leftists is a better bet. They're assuming that the people on the left and the LGBT activists, the Planned Parenthood folks, are more of a threat to them than social conservatives at the moment.
It seems like in this day and age we hear more about companies, big companies, taking a stand on political issues. From a business perspective, would it be better for big companies just not to take a position on any political issue, whether it be a conservative or a liberal one?
I mean, I think that makes sense, especially with issues that honestly divide the American people. I mean, abortion, marriage, these are issues that are very important to people on opposite sides of the spectrum. It doesn't make any sense to me from a purely business calculation that companies would weigh in, especially when the business has nothing to do with it. I mean, Netflix doesn't have anything to do with healthcare or abortion or any of those sorts of things. And so I think what we're seeing is a mix of ideological commitment on the part of the leadership and then a calculation that they have more to gain than to lose by siding with one side of the culture war. And I think it's up to social conservatives to persuade them that they're mistaken in that calculation.
Well, it's so interesting to hear more about this, and obviously we'll continue to follow as people speak out against this. Jay Richards, host of EWTN program Force for Good, and of course business professor at the Catholic University of America. Thanks for your analysis.
My pleasure, Wyatt. Good to be with you.
Up next, 2 Spanish missionaries work to honor Our Lady of the Rosary in war-torn South Sudan, and a preview of EWTN's news service coming to Africa. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A church in war-torn South Sudan fell into disrepair decades ago, and it's been ransacked and is practically unusable. But 2 missionaries from Spain are planning to change that. Their plan? To change Ave Maria into the Marian Shrine of Our Lady of the Rosary. The Spanish priests say they want to bring the gospel to the people of South Sudan in full by promoting education and preaching the importance of peace and reconciliation. The U.S.-based Sudan Relief Fund is helping. For more on this story, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Finally tonight, EWTN is preparing for the August launch of ACI-Africa, a Catholic news service based in Kenya that will publish content in English, French, and Portuguese. Earlier this week, Father Don Bosco Onyalla, ACI-Africa's editor-in-chief, paid a visit to our Washington office. Lauren Ashburn spoke with him about his vision for ACI-Africa and the growth of the church on the continent.
Father, welcome to Washington. Welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you. Good to have me.
Yes, I'm so happy that you're here. Tell us what your plans are for ACI-Africa.
Well, my plans are to bring together a network of Catholic journalists who will facilitate the telling of Africa's story from a faith perspective.
And from a faith perspective, but also from Africans, is that right?
By Africans. So the telling of Africa's story by Africans. And that is a big difference. Because
Why?
Many times we've had Africa stories told by non-Africans, and many times it's been a slant towards negativity, towards conflict, towards catastrophes. Whereas, true, we have challenges, we have issues in Africa, but there are many other good things happening.
Well, such as the church in Africa is vibrant, and it's growing the fastest, I think, the Catholic Church in the world.
It is, and pretty much that's why I'm happy, excited about the initiative, that we are able to bring the voice of Africa, the African church, the leaders, the bishops, the priests, the laity, to the universal church and within Africa itself.
What are the challenges in Africa? I know that South Sudan is having political turmoil. What are the challenges for conversion and for existing Catholics?
Well, there are a number of challenges within the continent, pretty much focused on leadership.
Leadership.
It's the failure of leaders to really live up to their promises when they are elected, to take care of the needs of the people. And I'm saying this because Africa is graced with so much resources. It's not a poor continent, it's a very rich continent. But because of poor leadership and corruption, that few people tend to amass so much wealth for themselves and forget the whole fact of sharing, the reality of human beings to live together and share. That is pretty much the challenge.
What about for the Catholic Church specifically?
Well, there is the fact of the faith being rooted in the people. It's been slow. So the faith has been spread. Missionaries have done their part, but there's still much more to be done within the continent. There are many areas that have not had the faith.
At all?
At all.
Period.
Period. They have not had it at all because they are remote, and means of transport, infrastructure has not facilitated the telling of the story of Christ to them. But I must say that there are many congregations that are religious that are reaching out to the deepest villages in Africa, living among the people, knowing what the people go through, and they are doing a lot. And part of this ACI-Africa will be to reach out to such missionaries and just share what they are going through in the process of evangelizing Africa.
Thank you so much for joining us, the head of ACI-Africa, Father Don Bosco Onyalla. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our thanks to Lauren Ashburn for that interview. I'm sure there's many in Africa and around the world who are excited about the church's growth and having a news agency to report on the continent's biggest issues affecting the church. And we want to thank you for watching tonight. That concludes our newscast. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.